Chapter 169 Fierce Battle 3. Han Li's and Senior Marshal Brother Lu's magic power was steadily being absorbed into the Sword Talisman and the Azure Flood Dragon Banner. Both their bodies and minds were focused on their struggle. They didn't dare to be careless or negligent in the slightest. Neither of them held any effort or magic power in reserve to prevent the other from overwhelming them. They both clearly understood that the slightest carelessness on either side would cause them to immediately lose their life along with the treasure. There was no longer a path for retreat. Thus, the struggle between the Azure Flood Dragon and the huge sword unexpectedly developed into a battle of attrition to see whose magic power would be exhausted first. When the two realized that the quantity of their remaining magic power was the crucial point of the battle, they both took action to increase their own spiritual power. They took out spirit stones and held them in their hand to absorb their magic power. However, Senior Marshal Brother Lu had a low-grade wind attribute spirit stone, while Han Li had a mid-grade earth attribute spirit stone. This discovery caused Senior Marshal Brother Lu's complexion to become unsightly, and he became exceptionally frightened and alarmed. A Qi condensation disciple unexpectedly possessed a mid-grade spirit stone that only sect cultivators at Foundation establishment or higher could obtain. This greatly surprised him, as it was widely known that mid-grade spirit stones replenished spiritual power far faster than low-grade spirit stones. In terms of replenishing spiritual power, he was at a great disadvantage. Regardless, Senior Marshal Brother thought better of it. His magic power was already much deeper than his opponent's. Even if his opponent replenished his magic power faster than he did, he wouldn't be able to persist for long. After all, the little bit of magic power that was replenished would be consumed at the same rate as it was used. It was truly insignificant. With this thought, Senior Marshal Brother Lu calmed down and concentrated. But when Senior Marshal Brother Lu saw Han Li's next action, Senior Marshal Brother Lu's expression changed once more to an appearance of disbelief and amazement. Han Li voluntarily removed his blue protective barrier in front of Senior Marshal Brother Lu and openly revealed his true body. Although Senior Marshal Brother Lu was outstandingly intelligent, his opponent's actions caused his mind to be in a state of confusion. He did not know what Han Li was thinking. Could it be that Han Li was no longer worried that his wind blades could take his life? Senior Marshal Brother Lu's thoughts surged several times throughout his mind but did not hesitate for long. He decisively extended his left hand toward the sky and formed a faint azure wind blade. However, Han Li did not wait for Senior Marshal Brother Lu to finish condensing his wind blade and flung his arm toward the opponent. The huge sword rigidly tangled with the Azure Flood Dragon suddenly resonated with great radiance. Han Li actually took advantage of his preoccupation with the wind blade to suddenly shake off the Azure Flood Dragon and shot straight toward Senior Marshal Brother Lu. In this short moment, Senior Marshal Brother Lu was startled and frightened by no small amount. If he persisted in forming the wind blade and attempted to launch it, he may be able to take Han Li's life. But equivalently, the giant sword would execute him, and he was also certain to lose his life, ending both sides in mutual destruction. Although the wind wall had yet to dissipate, this huge sword was able to contend with the Azure Flood Dragon Banner's transformation. That hurricane would certainly be easily destroyed by the huge sword and would be unable to obstruct it for even a fraction of a second. This Senior Marshal Brother Lu was unable to accept this outcome. He still had vast prospects and a beautiful future. He was simply unwilling to meet his end in the wilderness against this unknown person. With this in mind, he thought no further. He gave up on the wind blade and wildly channeled all of his magic power toward the Azure Flood Dragon and summoned it toward him. That Azure Flood Dragon banner was truly an amazing wind attribute magic tool. With the entirety of Senior Marshal Brother Lu's strength, it met Han Li's huge sword halfway and once again entered a struggle. Seeing this, Senior Marshal Brother Lu let out a sigh of relief, his body covered in cold sweat. Thus, in the following period of time, Senior Marshal Brother Lu attempted to cast magic techniques several more times, wanting to attack Han Li. However, Han Li used the same technique every time, forcing him to withdraw. Although Han Li hadn't the least bit of protection, he was unable to act against him. Senior Martial Brother Lu was incomparably sullen and was forced to rely on his deeper magic power, thereby continuing to deplete it. At this moment, Han Li took out various small herbs and such from his storage pouch and stuffed them into his mouth. As he chewed the large mouthfuls, Senior Martial Brother Lu was dumbstruck. He didn't know what other sinister plot his opponent was planning. He could not guess what his opponent was planning and was baffled, causing Senior Martial Brother Lu to feel bleak. He had a bad premonition. However, he cherished his life far too much. Although he was far more shrewd than normal people, he had been at his wits' end for a while. As more time passed by, Senior Martial Brother Lu's heart gradually grew heavier. At last, the Azure Dragon's light began to dim, but the huge gray streak was as dazzling as before. Senior Martial Brother Lu could not help but be frightened. He shouted out hoarsely, "Impossible! My magic power far exceeds yours. Even if you've been replenished by a mid-grade spirit stone, it is impossible for you to currently have energy remaining. You should have exhausted your magic power before I did." Soon, the Azure Flood Dragon was on the verge of collapse. Senior Martial Brother Lu yelled out. His shout was like the last bark of a wild dog that fell into a well, full of objection. When Han Li saw his plan completely realized, he could not help but smile. After he heard the opponent's words, his mouth slightly slanted, causing his smile to become a sneer. He didn't have the leisure to explain all of this to a dead man, as killing him was the most urgent affair. He was also almost entirely out of magic power, so how could he afford to waste that effort on the enemy? With that thought, Han Li paid no attention to the opponent's question. He pointed at the huge sword, causing its radiance to become even more magnificent. It gradually whittled away at the Azure Flood Dragon until it was only about 3 meters long. Its azure light was so dim that it could nearly no longer be seen. When Senior Martial Brother saw this, he became completely desperate. Thus, the desire to stake it all rose in his heart, and his eyes gradually shone with madness. Without speaking, he gradually retrieved the little magic power remaining in the Azure Flood Dragon banner, causing it to return to its original form in an instant and fall from the sky. Then, without regard for the huge sword rushing forth to execute him, he used his remaining magic power to condense a huge wind blade and ruthlessly throw it toward Han Li without the slightest hesitation. When Han Li saw this, his heart trembled. While the opponent rushed to throw the wind blade, he directed the huge sword to behead the opponent. Then, without staying to look at the aftermath, Han Li fled, already rushing out about 10 meters away. After previously receiving the wind blades, Han Li knew of their frightening speed. If he didn't immediately use shifting smoke steps to avoid it, he wouldn't be able to defend himself. He would have been caught unprepared and be cut into two, dying with grievances and unable to rest in peace. The wind blade was truly extraordinarily fast. It already reached the location where Han Li had just fled from. However, it unexpectedly followed the direction Han Li was fleeing in and fiercely shot out once more. Han Li did not think any further and used shifting smoke steps to its greatest extent. In a small area, he continuously shifted left and right, transforming into several afterimages, causing the wind blade that was closely chasing him to be unable to catch up. Han Li clearly understood that if he fled in a straight line, he would certainly be cut down by the wind blade. By using fine and delicate movements, he would be able to defend himself without worry. This was the reason why he dared to abandon his defensive magic technique. Poochie. The wind blade suddenly lost control and disappeared into the earth, leaving a deep groove. Han Li let out a long breath. At this moment, he calmed his panicked heart. Using a movement technique from the mortal world to evade a cultivator's attack was truly a frightening affair. Han Li sat on the ground and then looked across from him. He saw that the wind wall had already disappeared and that Senior Martial Lu, who had been hiding behind it, was cut into 2 pieces. The 2-pieced corpse laid there motionlessly. Next to it was a huge sword with a dimming radiance.